As we've seen a couple of times on this list already with the Panos LMP and the Cadillac LMP, I'm not ashamed to put race cars in my favourite cars list. I mean, I don't think anyone would be, but of course those cars very strictly stay in that lane of being favourite cars rather than dream cars. Now, I'm sure there are some people who do love the idea of trying to buy, for instance, an ex-race-winning car and road registering it, which you actually can do. Sometimes you have to alter the car a little bit, but it can be done. There's a guy in Japan, for instance, who owns a Rothmans Porsche 962C on the road. He drives it on the street. You can Google it and see him driving it around, which looks incredible. But for me personally, that's not as much of a dream. I do like the idea of having something like a road-going Cadillac LMP car, which, I mean, how awesome would that be? But at the same time, most of the love which I have for race cars tends to be more from an engineering or technical point of view, rather than something which I actually want to buy. And in effect, there are kind of three different subcategories of this list. They're all my favourites, but you've got some which are abstract favourites, some which are dream cars, and some which are more cars which I have as my favourites out of a huge amount of respect and also love for what they accomplished, what they achieved, or just a great idea. And for me, this has always been one of those cars, the Brabham BT46B, a car which I've talked about quite a few times on the channel. Again, it did feature in my Gran Turismo 7 wishlist series, and it is actually referenced in Gran Turismo 6. If you look in the information for the Chaparral 2J, they do reference this car. So I'm still holding out hope that we get this in some form. I'm certainly not expecting it anytime soon though, and I think if it were to be added to a modern racing game, of the two, Forza or Gran Turismo, I think it would probably be more likely to come to Forza, because they are going more into those left field choices, and I would love to see that happen. Now, the car, for those who are unfamiliar with it, uses a continuation, and I would say an improvement, of the idea which Chaparral actually instigated with the 2J. And although Chaparral is one of my favourite racing manufacturers, for sure, and Jim Hall, the owner of the company, was, as far as I'm concerned, a genius. He had so many great ideas when it came to race cars. Chaparral was the first ever team to use a rear wing, and they were the first company to use adjustable aero in the race. And of course, they made the first ground effect fan car with the 2J, and this car didn't come around until 8 years later. Of course, not from Chaparral, but very heavily and obviously inspired by it, using a single fan at the back, or a single fan outlet at least, instead of the two on the Chaparral. What I really love about this is that it refines the idea even more. And it surprises me actually that Jim Hall himself didn't do this in the first place. Because with the Chaparral, you've got a separate engine, a snowmobile engine, to run the fan. And the fan creates a low pressure area underneath the car, combined with skirting around the edges to keep the suction seal there, kind of like a vacuum cleaner, which in turn sucks the car to the road, giving you incredible amounts of downforce in what sounds like quite a comical way. But the thing is, it works. It makes the cars incredibly quick, and the best thing about it by far is that it's irrespective of speed. It doesn't matter if you're going 10 miles per hour or 100, you're getting the same amount of downforce. That simply does not happen with a conventional wing. So it gives you huge advantages around technical circuits, tight circuits, start-stop circuits like city tracks or Laguna Seca, that kind of thing. But the Brabham took it one step further, because of course you can't add that second engine in an F1 car, partially because you wouldn't be allowed to, but secondarily it would just add too much weight. But what they did instead was really clever, because they simplified it, they streamlined the idea, and they had it running off of the gearbox instead. It has a single fan outlet, as I said, at the back, which again declutters the concept, and it works in the same way. It creates that low pressure area, sucking the Formula car to the road, and the results speak for themselves. The Chaparral was a great idea, but it didn't even win a race, because of reliability issues of that second engine. Ironically, this car eliminated that issue, and the result was that the car, driven by Niki Lauda, incidentally, which always helps, in 1978 ran its first race, turned out to be its only race, and it won by 30 seconds. A 30-second win is not something that's easy to come by in the Grand Prix of any era, so it just went to show the incredible potential that this car had, and not just potential because it actually proved what it could do, but just like with the Chaparral, you had complaints from the other drivers about stones being thrown up. I mean, wear a full face helmet, what's the problem? Put a windscreen on your car, it's not difficult. Adapt and overcome. What happened to that way of thinking? But for various reasons, which I think are fairly petty, they banned the car. And as far as I'm aware, no race car since has ever used it, apart from, of course, the fictional Red Bull in Gran Turismo, which uses it to great effect. But this is one of those cars which, as I alluded to early on in the video, I love because of its tech. It's such a clever machine, it worked beautifully. This car has a 100% success rate, because it raced once and won, and it won by a huge margin. It's a shame that this kind of tech isn't allowed to be used more, because at the end of the day, if it had have been allowed, what would have happened? Well, more teams would have done it. And look at what happened in those 8 years between the 2J and this car. Already in those 8 years with only 2 teams using it, it got 100% more efficient, made it so much lighter, and it worked better. It went from making a very strong but flawed car to a literal race winner in 8 years, with only 2 vehicles showcasing the tech. So if more teams had been allowed to do it, doubtless everyone would have ended up using it, and if it's done well, it makes the car safer too. So it's kind of a contradiction with these days, the FIA with safety and all that. This would make the cars more safe. So it's a shame that it's not allowed more. Imagine a full GT3 grid with Porsches and GTRs and Audi R8s all using suction fans. How awesome would that be if it was just a universally accepted thing? It makes the cars faster, more controlled, and safer. What's the downside? There is none. So overall, I absolutely adore this car for its tech. I love the Chaparral even more overall as an all-round vehicle because, well, I just prefer the all-round vehicle, basically, but I do love this one. It's certainly worthy of a place in this list, and it's always one of my absolute favourite race cars, and although it's not quite my favourite Grand Prix car of all time, it's definitely up there for me. It's an incredible car, and it's the kind of car which, if you add it to any racing game, it's pretty much instantly going to become one of the most OP vehicles on the grid, despite the fact that this is from 1978. There is pretty much no other Grand Prix car from that era which could still worry Formula cars from today. And although it wouldn't necessarily beat them now, it could. It's got that kind of potential, and if it couldn't beat them, I would not be at all surprised if it didn't come close. That speaks for itself. A 40-year-old car that can still do that. That's pretty impressive. But of course, if you want to check out other cars in this list, you can click through at the end to do that, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.